The rain pelted against the old Victorian house like 1,000 tapping fingers, each droplet echoing through the empty halls and high ceilings. Eleanor stood by the fogged-up window, her slender fingers tracing the paths of the raindrops on the glass. She watched as the storm swallowed the last remnants of daylight, the rolling thunder sinking with the uneasy rhythm of her heartbeat. Solitude had always been her refuge, the quiet of the countryside a balm to her restless spirit. But tonight, unease curled in the pit of her stomach. The house, inherited from a distant relative she barely remembered, seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Every creak of the floorboards and sigh of the wind through the cracks felt amplified, as if the very walls were whispering secrets. As shadows lengthened and corners darkened, Eleanor couldn't shake the sensation that she was not as alone as she thought. Eleanor was a woman of quiet strength, her willowy frame belying the resilience forged from years of navigating the complexities of life on her own. An artist by trade, she sought inspiration in isolation, believing that the whispers of nature could reignite the spark that had dimmed after a painful breakup. Beneath her composed exterior, however, lingered remnants of childhood fears, a dread of the unseen and the unknown. She told herself those were childish notions, long buried in the past. Yet the creaking floors and the inexplicable cold spots in the old house tested her resolve. She found herself listening intently to the silence, as if expecting it to speak. Her days were filled with futile attempts to paint, the blank canvases mocking her. Nights were worse, plagued by restless dreams of faceless figures and echoes of laughter that dissipated when she awoke. It began subtly. One evening, as she painted in the dim light of her studio, the power flickered before plunging the house into darkness. The sudden loss of light caught her mid-stroke, the paintbrush slipping from her fingers and splattering crimson across the canvas. Muttering curses, Eleanor fumbled through drawers until she found a stash of old candles, their tiny flames casting long, wavering shadows that danced eerily along the walls. Navigating the unfamiliar layout, each creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep behind her. Then she caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye, a fleeting silhouette at the end of the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned sharply, only to find empty air. Dismissing it as a trick of the light and her overwrought imagination, she settled into bed, pulling the heavy quilt tight around her. But just as she drifted off, she heard it. The soft rustle of fabric and the faintest hint of music, like a distant melody carried on the wind. A haunting waltz that seemed both foreign and intimately familiar. The following nights brought more disturbances. With each sunset, the atmosphere in the house thickened, an invisible weight pressing down on her chest. Eleanor began to see them. Translucent figures that materialized when the lights went out. At first, they hovered at the edges of her vision, their bodies swaying gracefully in an otherworldly dance. Clad in antiquated attire, their gowns and suits flowed as if underwater. Their faces were shrouded in shadow, save for their eyes and sinister smiles that gleamed with an unnatural light. She tried to rationalize it, attributing the sightings to sleep deprivation or stress. But her denial crumbled when one dancer reached out during their silent waltz, its cold fingers grazing her arm and leaving a trail of numbness. Panic surged through her as she scrambled to turn on every light, the apparitions dissolving into the darkness, but leaving behind an icy chill that seeped into her bones. Desperation gnawed at her sanity. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. Every moment of darkness a doorway for the dancers to return. The more she illuminated the house, the bolder they became, appearing even in the penumbra of lamplight. Their dance grew frenzied, movements sharp and violent, their smiles stretching into grotesque grins that bared too many teeth. She barricaded herself in the brightest room, but the bulbs flickered and dimmed no matter how often she replaced them. One night, they cornered her in the parlor, their circle tightening as they spun faster and faster, the floorboards groaning under the strain. The air crackled with malevolence, and the walls seemed to close in. Eleanor's heart pounded like a drum in her ears as she backed against the fireplace. Just as icy hands clasped her wrists and pulled her into their deadly dance, a memory pierced through her terror. The old journal she'd found in the attic, filled with cryptic writings about the house's dark past. With adrenaline fueling her, Eleanor tore herself free and raced upstairs, the dancers' twisted laughter echoing unnaturally behind her. Their footsteps, light yet relentless, pursued her through the labyrinthine corridors. She seized the journal with shaking hands, frantically flipping through brittle pages that threatened to crumble. There, scrawled in spidery, faded ink, was a passage about breaking the curse. Embrace the darkness, surrender the light, and face the shadows without fear. It went against every instinct, but time was running out. The dancers appeared at the doorway, their eyes glowing like embers, their smiles widening impossibly. With a final, steadying breath, Eleanor closed her eyes and extinguished the last candle. Darkness engulfed her, thick and absolute. The dancers paused, their forms wavering uncertainly. Summoning every ounce of courage, Eleanor stepped toward them. "I see you," she whispered, her voice steady. "I release you from this place." The house began to tremble, a deep rumble resonating from its very foundation. One by one, the dancers' sinister smiles faded, their features softening into expressions of relief before they dissolved into wisps of smoke, vanishing like mist at dawn. Silence settled like a comforting shroud, the oppressive weight lifting from Eleanor's shoulders. She stood alone in the pitch black, her senses attuned to the subtle changes around her. The air was different now, no longer charged with fear, but calm and still. As dawn's first light seeped through the windows, painting the rooms with a gentle glow, the house felt transformed. The shadows seemed less menacing, the corners no longer hiding unseen watchers. Eleanor realized that the dancers were trapped souls, remnants of a tragedy forgotten by time, bound to the house by a curse that fed on fear and resistance. By facing them without terror, she had broken their chains. Exhausted, but filled with a profound sense of peace, she knew the house was truly hers now, its dark history laid to rest. She returned to her studio, sunlight warming the wooden floors and illuminating her once abandoned canvases. Sitting down, she began to paint with a fervor she hadn't felt in years, the images flowing effortlessly from her mind to the brush. The faces of the dancers emerged on the canvas, not as sinister apparitions, but as graceful figures finally at peace. Colors seemed more vibrant, each stroke filled with purpose. For the first time since arriving, Eleanor felt a genuine smile spread across her face, a spark of joy igniting within her. The house had given her not just inspiration, but a connection to something beyond herself, a story of redemption and release. As she signed her name at the corner of the painting, she knew she had found her muse and reclaimed her life from the shadows.